It's been 10 years since I received the letter. 10 years since my family's dark past was forced back into my life. The letter arrived on a typical Tuesday morning, its cream-colored envelope adorned with an old-fashioned crest that seemed to mock me. My parents had passed away when I was young, and I never thought I'd see this place again. But the letter brought it all flooding back. The words "We need you" were scrawled on a single sheet of paper, accompanied by a crude map of Hill House's labyrinthine corridors. The invitation seemed to be from my siblings, or what was left of them. I'd lost touch with them over the years, each drifting off in different directions after Mom and Dad's death. But now they wanted me back. I remember feeling a mix of emotions: guilt, curiosity, and a healthy dose of fear. Hill House had always been a place of dark legend, where unexplained occurrences and supernatural events were said to plague anyone who dared enter its walls. My siblings and I had all heard the whispers, but we never thought it would affect us personally. I tried to brush off the letter, telling myself it was just some kind of prank or a cruel joke from someone with an axe to grind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This was something more, something that reached into my very soul and shook me to my core. As I stood there, staring at the letter in my hand, I felt the room around me begin to spin. The shadows on the walls seemed to twist and writhe like living things, as if they too were trying to tell me something. And then, without warning, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting one of my siblings calling to discuss their plans for my return. But instead, I heard only silence, an oppressive, heavy stillness that seemed to suffocate me whole. I hung up the phone, my hand still trembling from the sudden silence. The letter and the call had left me feeling unsettled, but I knew I couldn't ignore them any longer. I needed to see this through, for myself and for my siblings. So, with a sense of trepidation, I booked a flight to Ravenswood, the town where Hill House stood. As I stepped off the plane, the crisp autumn air hit me like a slap in the face. It was as if nature itself was warning me away from this place. But I pushed on, my car packed with essentials and my heart heavy with anticipation. I arrived at Hill House just after sunset, when the sky was painted with hues of crimson and gold. The mansion loomed before me, its turrets and spires reaching towards the heavens like skeletal fingers. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stepped out of the car, my eyes fixed on the entrance. The front door creaked ominously in the wind, as if it too was warning me away. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural and the unknown, and this was the chance to explore Hill House's darkest secrets up close. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls as I made my way to the main room. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. It was as if time itself had been frozen here, waiting for me to stir. I looked around, taking in the faded portraits on the walls and the cobweb-shrouded chandeliers. This was a place where the past and present collided, where the living and the dead coexisted in a twisted dance. I knew that my siblings were inside, waiting for me. But as I stood there, frozen in anticipation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls as I made my way to the main room. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. It was as if time itself had been frozen here, waiting for me to stir. I looked around, taking in the faded portraits on the walls and the cobweb-shrouded chandeliers. This was a place where the past and present collided, where the living and the dead coexisted in a twisted dance. I knew that my siblings were inside, waiting for me. I started to explore, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls as I made my way through room after room. Each space was filled with the same sense of abandonment and neglect: old furniture covered in dust, windows boarded up from the outside, and a feeling of malevolent presence that seemed to seep into my bones. I began to feel like I was being herded towards some unknown destination, as if Hill House itself was guiding me deeper into its depths. I stumbled upon a door that seemed out of place. It was slightly ajar, with a faint sliver of light emanating from beneath the threshold. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stairway that plunged deep into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before taking a step down into the unknown. The air grew colder with each step, until I was almost certain that I could see my breath as it misted into the air. And then, suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to be calling out to me from the depths below. As I descended into the darkness, the whisper seemed to grow louder, more urgent. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, a faint light flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, illuminating a room that seemed frozen in time. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim glow. The room was small, with walls lined with old photographs and newspaper clippings. In the center of the room, a large wooden table bore the scars of countless meals and arguments. And on the walls, scrawled in red ink, were the names of my siblings and me, our dates of birth, our ages at the time of our parents' death. I felt like I'd stumbled into a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. The table seemed to loom over me, its surface etched with the words, "They died for your sins." I began to read through the newspaper clippings, each article detailing a different tragedy: a fire that had ravaged our family home, a car accident that had killed my parents, a mysterious illness that had claimed their lives. But as I delved deeper into the articles, I realized that something was off. The events seemed too connected, too orchestrated. And then I stumbled upon a photograph of myself and my siblings as children. We were standing in front of Hill House, our smiles bright and carefree. But on the back of the photo, someone had scrawled a single phrase: "They'll never escape." As I continued to explore the room, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. The air seemed to thicken, and the shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe like living things. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a faint whispering in my ear, a soft susurration that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, trying to see who or what was speaking to me, but there was no one there. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold breeze caress the back of my neck. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. I was trapped in the blackness, unable to move or escape. And then I saw it, a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room, a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw her, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching me with eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. She was tall and gaunt, with skin as white as marble and hair as black as night. And then she spoke, her voice like a rusty gate. It sent shivers down my spine. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The woman began to move towards me, her eyes fixed on mine with an unnerving intensity. I felt like I was being pulled into their depths, like I was drowning in a sea of darkness. And then, everything went white. As I regained consciousness, I found myself in a room filled with my siblings. They were all staring at me with an unnerving intensity, their eyes sunken and their skin pale. The woman from the previous room was nowhere to be seen, but her presence still lingered in the air. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. My siblings seemed to sense something was wrong, because they began to close in on me. Their movements were slow and deliberate, like they were being manipulated by some unseen force. I felt a wave of fear wash over me as I realized that I was trapped. The door was locked, the windows barred, and there was no way out. I tried to reason with them, but they just stared at me with empty eyes. They seemed to be in a trance-like state, their minds consumed by some dark force. And then they began to speak, their voices like a chorus of whispers, each one repeating the same phrase over and over again. "We're home." I knew that I had to get out of there, but my body felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The siblings began to move closer, their faces twisted into grotesque grins. And then they reached out and touched me. I felt a surge of fear as I realized that I was surrounded by people who were no longer human. They were vessels for something dark and malevolent, and I was trapped in this nightmare with them. I tried to scream, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of their whispers. "We're home." Over and over again, they repeated those words until I felt like I was going mad. And then everything went black. As I regained consciousness, I found myself in a room that seemed to be locked from the inside. The walls were covered in strange symbols and murals, depicting scenes of darkness and despair. I tried to stand up, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. Suddenly, the door creaked open and a figure loomed over me. It was one of my siblings, their eyes black as coal, their skin deathly pale. They spoke in a voice that was not their own, "Welcome home." I tried to speak, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The sibling handed me a small key, saying, "Open the door." I took the key and turned it, unlocking a door that led to a room filled with photographs. Each one depicted a family member, all of whom were smiling and happy. But as I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Each person was wearing a different name tag. John, Mary, Emily. My own name tag read Elizabeth. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized the horrifying truth. I was not who I thought I was. I was not a part of this family. And then I saw it, a photograph of myself with my parents, but they were not my real parents. They were the siblings from the room with the symbols. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was being kept as a prisoner in my own home. And then everything went black. I lay in bed trying to sleep, but the silence was oppressive. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had tried to distract myself with books and TV shows, but nothing seemed to work. The whispers had started a few nights ago. At first it was just a faint rustling in the walls, but over time they grew louder, more urgent. It was as if someone or something was trying to tell me something. I threw off the covers and got out of bed, determined to get some answers. I crept through the darkened house, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing off the walls. I followed the sound, my feet leading me to a door that I had never noticed before. It was hidden behind a tattered tapestry, and it looked old, like it hadn't been opened in years. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should investigate further, but something compelled me to turn the handle and push the door open. The whisper stopped suddenly, and an oppressive silence fell over me. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. And then I saw it, a room filled with old photographs, each one depicting a family member from my past. There were pictures of my parents, my grandparents, even great-grandparents that I had never met. But what caught my attention was the last photograph on the wall. It was of me, standing in front of a house that looked identical to our own. But there was something different about it. Something that made my blood run cold. I realized then that I wasn't who I thought I was. This wasn't my family's home. And the whispers. They were trying to tell me something, but what? I spun around, searching for answers, but there were none. The room was empty except for one thing, a small note on the wall with a single sentence scrawled in red ink. "You're not who you think you are." I spent the next few days researching the history of Hill House, scouring through old newspapers and dusty archives for any mention of our family's past. I was determined to uncover the truth about what had happened here and why I felt so trapped. I started with my parents' deaths, looking for any record of a car accident or fire that could have caused such devastation. But every lead ended in disappointment. It seemed as though our family's history had been carefully erased, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. I decided to dig deeper, searching for anything that might reveal the truth about Hill House's dark past. I spent hours poring over old newspapers, looking for any mention of a tragedy or disaster that could have occurred here. And then, one article caught my eye. It was an old newspaper clipping from 20 years ago, detailing a fire that had ravaged our family's home. But what really caught my attention was the name of the victim, Elizabeth Blackwood. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words, Elizabeth Blackwood, because it wasn't just any Elizabeth. It was me. I was starting to realize that I had been living in someone else's life, and that Hill House was more than just a place. It was a prison. It didn't take long for me to uncover the rest of the story. The fire had occurred 20 years ago when I was still alive. My parents had died in the blaze, and I had been left with severe burns and injuries. But I had survived somehow. I couldn't understand why my family had kept this secret from me, or what they had done to erase our past. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them keep it a secret anymore. It was time for the truth to come out. As I stood there staring at the old newspaper clipping, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was as if the room around me began to blur and distort, like a reflection in rippling water. I looked down at my hands, and they seemed to be melting away, like wax in a furnace. My skin was slick and smooth, and my fingers were long and spindly. I felt a sense of detachment, as if I was watching myself from outside my body. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely a whisper. The words tumbled out of my mouth in a jumbled mess, like a child learning to talk. "What's happening?" I asked, but the sound of my own voice was strange and unfamiliar. I looked around the room, but everything seemed to be shifting and changing. The furniture was melting like wax, and the walls were closing in on me. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. I stumbled backwards, desperate to escape the suffocating feeling. But every step I took led me further into the heart of the madness. I saw visions of my past, fragmented and disjointed. I saw myself as a child, playing with my siblings in the garden of Hill House. I saw myself as a teenager, arguing with my parents in the kitchen. And I saw myself as an adult, standing at the edge of a cliff, staring out into the void. I couldn't tell what was real and what was just a product of my fevered imagination. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition. I stumbled through the house, searching for a way out. But every door I opened led only to more questions. Every window I looked through showed me only darkness and despair. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror, with no escape from the horrors that haunted me. I screamed and screamed, but my voice was lost in the void. The world around me melted away, leaving only the sound of my own madness. I was consumed by the darkness, and I knew that I would never be free. As I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My eyes were black as coal, and my skin was deathly pale. I looked like a creature from my worst nightmares. I took a step back, horrified by what I saw. But as I turned to leave, I felt a presence behind me. It was the monster within me, staring back at me with cold, calculating eyes. I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The monster began to move closer, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. I raised my hands in defense, but they were like claws, sharp and deadly. I was no longer human, but a creature driven by primal instincts. I felt a scream building up inside me, but it was not mine. It was the monster's voice, screaming out its rage and frustration. I was trapped in a living hell, with no escape from the beast that lurked within me. I was facing my own worst fears, and I knew that I might never make it out alive. I took a deep breath and let the scream rip through me. It was like a dam breaking, releasing all the pent-up rage and fear that had been building up inside me. I felt myself transform, my body contorting into twisted, inhuman shapes. My skin was stretched tight over my bones, and my eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I was no longer human, but a monster, driven by primal urges and insatiable hunger. I looked at my reflection one last time, and I saw the face of my own worst enemy staring back at me. I knew that I would never be free from the monster within. As I stood in my own flesh, staring at the monster that had taken over my body, I knew that I was doomed. The darkness closed in around me, like a shroud of despair. I felt myself being pulled down into the abyss, with no escape from the terror that lurked within. I stumbled forward, driven by some primal urge to destroy everything that was left of my sanity. I smashed through walls and furniture, leaving a trail of destruction in my wake. I saw visions of my past, like a twisted montage of memories that were not mine. I saw myself as a child, playing with my siblings in the garden of Hill House. I saw myself as a teenager, arguing with my parents in the kitchen. And I saw myself as an adult, standing at the edge of a cliff, staring out into the void. I was consumed by the darkness, and I knew that I would never be free. The monster within me had taken over, and I was nothing but its puppet. I looked around, trying to see if there was anyone left who could save me from this descent into madness. But there was no one, only the endless void of terror that seemed to stretch on forever. I took a final step forward, and then I fell. I fell into the abyss with no safety net to catch me. I fell into the darkness with no hope of ever escaping. I was gone, consumed by the monster within. The last thing I saw was my own reflection, staring back at me with cold, dead eyes. I was no more. The terror had won.